Hello folks, and welcome to this week's review. And this week I've got a headphone amplifier for you. Well, it's a combo. It's mostly a headphone amplifier, but there's a preamp bonus extra feature slotted inside the chassis. This one is it supports single-ended mode, and it can be fully balanced. It's from the Chinese company Soncoz, and it's called the Sga1. The Sga1 retails at somewhere around £470, give or take a penny or two. So on social media, for example, I would say Soncoz receives less attention than some of the other Chinese brands out there, and that's a little bit unfair because Soncoz is always worthy of attention. They don't always get things right, but they're always worthy of some attention, and they're always worthy of investigation, I feel. I find them a little different from the immediate competition. The aesthetic, the design, and even the sound. I found there was much to like about their low-cost DAC released a little while ago now, the LA QXD1, for example, and I've done a review of that very DAC on this channel, and you can click on the link above and watch that review for yourself. But before we go any further, let's take a deeper dive into this design, and let's take a closer look. And welcome to the closer look section for the Soncoz Sga1 headphone amplifier with extra preamp goodness. Arriving in either silver or black, the Sga1 is an appreciable size, I would say, spanning 250mm by 225 by 55mm. Thing is though, the actual weight doesn't really tally with that size. Looking at the chassis in front of you here, you may expect it to be a, well, slightly weightier box, but it's rather deceiving because there's only 2 kilograms of weight in here. In the packing, apart from the actual Sga1 itself, there's a multilingual leaflet, a brief affair acting as a manual that packs a lot into a small space, a common practice from Chinese hi-fi companies, I find. There's also a power cable and headphone socket converter from 6.35mm to 3.5mm. Now let's have a closer look at the front fascia, and you will see 2 flavors of balanced connection on the far left on the front here. There is a 4-pin XLR, and right next to that is a 4.4mm Pentacon balanced connection. To the right of those is a single-ended socket, 6.35mm in this case. Wafting slowly to the right, we can see an OLED screen, which I will spring into life in a moment. And we end up at a multifunction rotary knob. Now, this multifunction knob can be rotated, but in addition to that, it can also be pressed in to select menu options. Flipping over to the rear now, and there are single-ended and balanced inputs, and single-ended and balanced outputs. There's an IEC power socket, and in addition to that, we can see a rocker power switch. Moving back to the front, and let's have a look at that menu, shall we? Now, apologies for the quality of this particular sequence, but this is a camera trying to focus on a highly reflective surface with the LEDs just underneath, and it's having a bit of a problem. Part of the issue here is the actual luminescence of the LEDs is quite low. There is no brightness option here. You can't change the brightness of the readout here. This is something I like. I quite like a low-key interface of this sort. Others, well, you may not. It's a shame Soncoz didn't provide an option here to vary that brightness. Selecting the volume, headphone gain, inputs and outputs are all done via the multifunction knob on this front fascia. In broad terms, selecting an option means pressing the knob inwards to enter the menu mode and then rotating left or right to roam across the available options. Pressing the knob again forces a selection. Now let's say you've selected the input. You can then move down into a second menu level to decide upon a single-ended input or a balanced input. A quick pressing of the rotary knob selects your required choice. Be aware, changing these settings only occurs after a second's thought by the Sga1. So rapid volume changes won't immediately be registered by the screen. I recommend taking it slow to allow the software to keep up. Now, according to Soncoz, this is done on purpose. This is a relay delay that, according to the company, offers a, quote, pop-free, unquote, performance to save your ears from any shocking high volumes, well, unexpectedly shocking high volumes. This interface is software control, which, says the company, is more reliable than a hardware system. Finally, volume settings relating to source settings are remembered. Hence, if you connect this amplifier to your hi-fi via single-ended mode and then changed to balance mode, the Sga1 will memorize your volume and gain settings on each combination of input and output. The interface itself is pretty easy to use, and after a couple of minutes of messing around with it, I'm sure you become familiar with it. The company also brags about the internal toroidal transformer, high quality capacitors, and its multiple op-amp units, along with internal isolation shielding. But how does this thing actually sound? Is it any good? Well, let's go over to the sound quality tests and we'll find out. And welcome back to the sound quality tests for the Soncoz Sga1 Headphone Amplifier. I began these sound tests in single-ended mode, and I brought in a pair of Sennheiser HD 800s to do myself a little bit of listening. I selected a CD and tried Depeche Mode's Personal Jesus from the album Violator. The single-ended performance was interesting indeed because it offered a relatively even-toned, neutral presentation. There was no undisciplined frequency emphasis here at all. There were no badly behaved mid-range elements, no booming bass or pinching treble. Everything was as it should be. Everything was in its place. And that's a good thing because you really need to have a good foundation for the rest of the soundstage to build upon. If that basic foundation is all over the place and a bit of a mess, everything goes downhill from there. So this was a good start from the Soncoz. The basic core sound here was clean and rather well mannered. The upper frequencies were surprisingly good in single-ended mode. There was much to like, with good insight from the varied synth lines and vocal delivery, providing a good emotional response. So, for example, I was pleased to hear rather shy instruments in the mix coming through, and the ear was able to pick them up. There was a particular acoustic guitar which I hardly hear at all across any hi-fi system, and yet I could pick it out through my headphones via the Soncoz. On the other hand, bass was rather recessed. I wanted to hear power, I wanted to hear punch on this track, and it wasn't there. On this one point, the song demanded presence, and presence is what the Soncoz did not deliver, especially during the later extended instrumental section. There was no real heart to the song here. Lots of detail, yes, lots of information, that's right. Some lovely fragility in the upper mids and a great dynamic reach from those upper mids. But the bottom end was sorely lacking. So I wondered if a shufty around was in order. So I removed the HD 800s and I brought in a pair of HD 660Ss from Sennheiser, and I tried the single-ended mode again just to confirm that there were issues with the bass, and there were. No change there. The personality was the same and consistent in this area at least. So I removed the cable for the HD 660Ss and I inserted a balanced Pentacon option instead, just to see if the balanced mode would change the sonic signature in any way. And it certainly did. This was more like it. The detail from the mids remained, as did the dynamic reach around the upper frequencies in general terms. If anything, this area was actually extended a tad. What really changed though was the overall tonal balance. The bass was suddenly back, and with some vengeance as well. This track really needed the power to push the music forward, and the balance connection certainly provided that. The added mass gave this song some drive, a forward motion that swung the hips and forced the head into a classic nodding configuration. The great thing about bass via this balanced connection was that bass wasn't introduced like a sledgehammer. It wasn't like flicking on a loudness button. It wasn't that sort of bass. This was well integrated bass. Bass maturely inserted into the mix, as if it's been there all the time, as if it was always part of the mix, which of course it is. The balance connection is merely extracting it. So there was no sense of bass swamping the lower end like some torrent. It fitted in quite nicely. The detail and the open nature of the mid-range remained, and that information was never masked. In fact, the same information now offered a maturity and a richness which made this area all the more attractive. So it looked like balanced was the way to go. And I thought I'd continue this. So I removed the single-ended output mode, which connected the actual headphone amp to my hi-fi, and I replaced that with a balanced mode. So for the first time, I had balanced running all the way through, from my headphones and through to the hi-fi. And once more, this added more maturity and a smoothing of the mid-range. The upper frequencies as a whole now, well, almost glided across the soundstage in a relaxed and rather unhurried manner. The noise floor lowered appreciably. You could really hear a reduction, a further reduction of noise. You could hear more reverb tails, that sort of echo effect off the back of instruments. And where there were no reverb tails in the first place, well, now you could hear them. Now you could hear little reverb tails where none previously existed. All of this made the Sga1 sound a little more expensive, frankly. There was a sense of a luxuriousness in the playback now. More than that, the bass remained massy and powerful and still did not mask or veil detail in any way. In fact, I thought it was better integrated into the mix as a whole. There was nothing flashy about the bass in this particular configuration. The bass had a job to do and it got on with it, and it didn't fuss while it was doing it. I then moved over to ELO on vinyl, and some of the early work. This is a track called First Movement, in brackets, Jumping Biz. Why? I don't know, but it is. This is an acoustic guitar track, instrumental, Spanish guitar, I would say. We've got violins in the background, you've got cellos. It's a right old mixture of organic instruments. The instrumental separation on this track allowed a heap of detail to spring forth. Each and every instrument on this track could be picked out and followed independently, while each offered enough detail in the mix to delight the ear. Cymbal taps offered delicacy and reverb, while bass-driven percussion provided power, but once more, there was no real threat of any masking between the two. Each was allowed to offer the ear a maximum effort, which was all very nice, well and good, but I'm missing something, aren't I? There was the additional preamp mode. What about the preamp on the Soncoz? I hooked up a pair of powered speakers. I chose my Canto YU4s. The overall sonic quality of my Cantos raised up, well, by at least a couple of rungs up the ladder. I was most surprised. There was a rather even-handed sense of performance here and a 3D effect around the central stereo image. The Sga1 allowed these speakers to reach a level of mid-range insight that they could only have dreamed about previously. What the Sga1 gave to the Canto powered speakers was a sense of the lively combined with enough raw power that allowed the Cantos a real skipping through the daisies sense of fun. And that's what the Sga1 brought to these speakers, a real sense of fun. Sometimes listening to the Cantos, because they have their own pros and a few cons, sometimes there can be a bit of a feeling when you're listening to them. They're decent speakers, don't get me wrong, but they're not perfect. When you add the Soncoz as a preamplifier for these powered speakers, they really lift them up, and there's a real, as I say, a real sense of fun listening to them. So the Sga1 as a preamp, big thumbs up. So how do I conclude the rather intriguing review of the Soncoz Sga1 headphone amplifier? Well, as we've already found out, the Soncoz Sga1 is a valuable addition to any small footprint hi-fi system purely as a preamp. It can lift lower cost components to a higher level, giving the system as a whole a sheen of quality. I wouldn't necessarily buy the Soncoz as a dedicated preamp. You can, but you're spending a lot of money also on the headphone section, so I'd keep that in mind. Myself, I'd buy it as a headphone amp and then have the preamp as a decent little extra bonus. And as a headphone amplifier, well, the performance in single-ended mode was distinctly underwhelming. Now, a lot of people are single-ended in their headphone use, so the Soncoz, well, might live and die on that one point alone. During the tests, I felt I was getting half the sound output with the bass still asleep in bed. The detail and information was there, but it lacked drive. But if you have balanced headphones and or a balanced option in your hi-fi, well, it's a different matter. It's a real Jekyll and Hyde thing here. When balanced mode was introduced, the Sga1 sprang to life and put on a real show. Detail and information now revealed itself upon a firm and solid foundation. The resultant tonal balance produced a seasoned and abundant soundstage, and that was full of individual highlights for the ear to pick out. In short, I would only buy the Sga1 headphone amplifier if you have balanced headphones and or a balanced connection on your amplifier. As such, balanced mode provides a suite of sonic highlights and provides a top-notch mature sound. If you can go balanced with the Sga1, you'll have a great time with this headphone amp. And that's it, folks. Thank you very much for staying to the end of this video, and if I could ask you, if you could please, to click on the like and also subscribe button below. That would be a big help for the channel, as always. Check out the description. There are chapter headings in there if you want to bounce between different sections of this video. There's also a host of links down there, including my website. There's all kinds of exclusive material on there you won't find in this channel. Also my Patreon site, which helps this channel to keep going. If you can support me, that would be great. And I'll be back next week with another video, hopefully another review, a little bit different, I think, next time round. I hope I can see you there. I'd love to have your company. Until that time, bye bye for now.